Welcome to Planting Pinellas, the podcast that digs deep into the heart of gardening in Pinellas County. Presented by Master Gardener volunteers of the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. I'm Charlotte Vaughn.
I'm Alan Shapiro. Whether you're a local looking to connect with your community or a visitor curious about your area's culture, conservation, and all things green, this is the place for you.
Join us as we explore the people, places, projects, and of course plants that make Pinellas a thriving hub of sustainability, innovation, and natural beauty. From gardening tips to environmental initiatives, we've got the roots of Pinellas covered. So grab your gardening gloves and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back. And we're glad to have Alan back in the studio again with us.
I am so excited to be back, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah, bit of a world traveler, but we are going to be talking about the tropics. And I'm having a little bit of fun with this word, as I think most of you have figured out. We're kind of geeks here, and I say we, but
I am too.
So we're just playing around with that word, tropical, and what it really is and how it affects us. And so I'd really starting out with the idea of what is tropical as far as climate, and are we a tropical climate? Because the answer might surprise some people.
Yeah, and I think that's important to know because we hear that too often. Are tropical plants, and will they grow here? Will they not grow here? And what does that mean for us?
Yeah, so technically, the tropical climates are based on tropics. Geographically, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are the north and south limits as sort of that waistband around the globe above and below the equator. So I'm a visual person, and this is an audio podcast. So to describe a little bit, if you're not looking at a map of where these fall, the Tropic of Cancer is the more north of the two. Looking from our perspective of the Americas, kind of through the middle of Mexico, and it really splits right between Cuba and the Bahamas. So when you see Florida and you see that big island just below the Keys, that would be Cuba. The line is just above that. So it skates on the edge.
Key West would kind of be on the edge if we think about it that way.
But it's still technically
not
above it.
Right.
So Florida is not geographically tropical. So some of the climate impacts when we think about what do the tropics mean, and before I go too far there, just to cover the south of it, on our perspective, it's kind of the lower third of Brazil where it cuts back through. It's just above Argentina. So again, if you're looking at a map, that long skinny country on the bottom of South America, that you've got Brazil up on the top shoulder, Argentina goes down to the bottom tip. So where you really see the top of that lowest country is where that Tropic of Capricorn cuts through.
And if we get real geeky in terms of latitude, around 23 degrees north to 23 degrees south, approximately.
And there was a bunch of decimals with that. But
correct. But
we have our limits on the geekiness here.
Very much so. But that would constitute the tropics, which we know would usually be high humidity, high heat, pretty much year round.
Right.
But I guess if you think about the northern end of that, it's variable within that also.
Yeah, and you lose a lot of the seasonality that when you're more at the equator and in those regions closest to it, that it's pretty much just hot all year round. And you don't get a distinct summer versus winter. It just kind of all runs together as a hot, humid year.
There probably is more like a rainy season. I mean, we were in Puerto Rico time in December. It was in the 80s every day. It was high humidity every day, but it didn't rain much. We did get some rain here and there, but it wasn't like what they would consider like our rainy season.
And our rainy season very much relates to tropical weather, as we call it, because the hurricanes are considered, you see it on the weather forecast. Here's our tropical outlook for the next 7 days or 10 or whatever, that they're watching for those storms that spin up along those tropical lines. And just a totally out of the blue side fact is that tropical systems can't actually cross the equator. I always think that that's so cool. Like they can cross between Atlantic and Pacific, but they can't cross the equator because they actually spin in opposite directions. There's so much weird science that goes into all of this, but I digress.
So then going back to that, so if we're not tropical, we're considered what's called subtropical or subtropics.
Because we get some of the effect. We get more of the hot, humid summers, but we do have a little bit of what we would call a winter, but it's very mild. So
I wouldn't call things winter. This is just me.
Sure.
We have the rainy season and we have our dry season. But
Yeah.
And so our seasonality is very, I would say we could call it winter, we can call it spring, because that's what the rest of our country does. But I think for us.
Well, and even North Florida has.
Right. North Florida.
We had snow last year.
Correct.
Along the Panhandle and into Tallahassee, but not here.
There's variability all the time within any of these regions. But
Sure.
that's just another whole thing. I think the idea of having distinct seasons is not something that I personally feel like we have in our area.
Yeah, the variation is so much less than a more northern area would experience that it feels like we don't have distinct seasons the way that someplace North Florida up into Georgia and above would have, or certainly once you get up into the New England states, for example, that they have very obvious winter and very obvious summer. They're in heat waves and snowstorms and everything in between. So talking about tropical weather, though, we all know that that's a big impact around here. And hopefully this year with the El Nino, we won't get any damaging storms, but we need the rain because we're in a drought.
We're still in a drought.
Right. And thankfully, end of June into early July, we've had some rainfall that's helping. And I think that some of the was it the Space Coast area, somewhere on the east side of Florida, that some of those drought levels have dropped so that they're no longer considered a drought anymore, that they're back in the green. But we're not. We're still in the red. So we need the rain, but we don't want the damaging storm.
Exactly. I think a lot of meteorologists love to have a tropical system come through, not a hurricane, but a system that would bring a lot of rain.
Right. And especially when the center of it stays offshore and we just get the rain without the damaging wind. Right. But we know that it can happen, and one is enough, as we all know.
We certainly know that.
Sorry for the PTSD.
I know.
But,
and yes, and sorry that we're going to get into this, but I think it's really important that we talk about this. I mean, we've talked about this a number of times on episodes before in terms of planning before the hurricane season and what you should be doing. But I think it's really important that we get deep into it now, really. It's maybe, I don't know if it's still not too late, I think, for us.
Right.
Because I think that most of our hurricanes will come about toward the end of August and into September.
And sometimes even October. So,
correct.
Generally we get more storms here later in the season versus right now. So in either case, hopefully we're coming into more of a rainy pattern. And how do we handle that in the garden? Because there's a lot of things that we can do. And I love a great resource that we can put out. And one that I came across in looking forward to this episode was from the Gardening Solutions section of the IFAS website. And under the Care and Weather section, it's just called Hurricane Landscaping. So talking about gardening for tropical weather, gardening for hurricanes, there's some great things that we can really put in place. And one of them is the right plant in the right place. We keep coming back to that. And they specified about trees, but it really is all the plants, because you have to know if you're in an area that gets saltwater inundation or any other things, that you still need to be aware of your gardening areas and even your microclimates within your space, that some of them need more water, some of them experience more salt or more wind or more sun. So understanding what you're working with and choosing a plant that is well suited to that spot.
That is so important, and especially with the trees. And I think it was interesting in that document that you mentioned, there was a report that was done that looked at trees specifically, because I think people think about that as one of the things that's most devastating. And certainly our hurricanes from a couple of years ago, the amount of trees that fell were amazing. And so this report analyzed 150 urban tree species, responded to 10 major hurricanes, identifying what makes trees more or less wind resistant. And I think that's what's most important. I think people don't think about that, and pruning is important with that. But the findings were that the higher wind speeds, poor tree health, limited rooting space, shallow soil, and improper pruning, and we'll talk about that later on, greatly increase the likelihood of the tree's failure.
Yeah. And you have to think about what is the exposure of my tree, not just to sun and water and salt, but also to wind, because I don't live at the coast, and yet I had some really significant wind damage on the north side of my property because it butts up to a north-south road.
Right.
So the wind was able to flow unrestricted down that road and tore out my arbor. So
the wind direction is an important piece
Yeah.
of that too. But the species also matters. And I thought this was interesting in this study because it talked about like laurel oaks not being a really great tree species. But when we look at what was planted in a lot of communities was laurel oaks because they grow very quickly,
right.
but they're not really good for wind resistance.
Well, in general, things that grow slower tend to root better because the more canopy that they have, that acts like a sail. And without having the roots really anchoring them, then that sail is going to take more force than the roots can handle. So something that is super fast growing is less likely to be appropriate in a area like ours that gets so much wind, that if you get something that's a little slower growing, it will tend to put down better roots. And so then it balances the canopy with the structure and stability that it can grow and have.
Definitely. So, but some of the species that they mentioned that are better are live oak, sand live oak, sable palm, bald cypress, palm cypress, magnolia, holly, even dogwood. And interesting to bring in the palms, though, and not to get into the pruning piece of it yet, but I think that's one of the things that people do the wrong way is pruning. And if they're going to do any pruning, really go call an arborist.
Yeah, and I even heard one of my neighbors walking by commenting on a crepe myrtle tree in another yard, and the other person in the group said, "Oh, they're such high maintenance trees." I think, well, what's high maintenance of them unless you're over pruning them? That, yeah, you do have to trim out the suckers on occasion, that they'll tend to keep growing up from the root area. But if you just let them grow into a more natural tree-shaped form and don't hack off the tops constantly, then they are actually a pretty low maintenance tree. So if you're pruning them correctly, and this goes for crepe myrtles as well as other trees, that if you're pruning them correctly, less is more. So let's talk pruning. Let's talk.
I would say we talked about many times. We're going to get into a whole episode on pruning, but in my experience, I think on something like a crepe myrtle, probably an individual probably could do that. When you get into the larger trees and larger species, you definitely need to call an arborist.
Right. And especially making sure that good safety measures are in place, because I know I have a large oak tree that reaches across a fence. And if you drop something in the wrong spot, then now you have to repair your fence or your pool screen or your neighbor's shed or whatever. So an arborist is going to have the better tools to make sure that everything is done safely and appropriately. They've got insurance to cover it if they mess up. And it's just better for the health of the tree to make sure that you're pruning at the proper angles and you're pruning the tree in a way that boosts its health instead of weakening it, because you can actually create more of a hazard with improper pruning than if you had just left it alone.
Exactly. And then again, when it comes to the hurricane coming through, the improper pruning could really do more damage than if it was. Because I think one of the things that, and I remember this from our master gardening class, as we were talking about trees, having more area for the wind to go through is better for the tree and for the stability and for the tree not to fall. And so if you're doing the pruning and you're not sure what you're doing, and plus it also can hurt the tree. We haven't talked specifically about the angles and all that geeky stuff. But and that's where the arborist hopefully comes in and knows what they're doing. And if you would be able to make sure that that tree is going to be pruned properly.
But let's say that it is a smaller tree or it's a young enough one that you feel confident to do it yourself. Sure. The base guideline is dead, dying, and diseased. That if you see limbs that are completely dead, if you scratch the bark on the surface, if there's no green under that surface, then that branch is dead. And generally, you can start further out at the tip and see if it'll break easily. And if it breaks and it's just kind of dry or crumbly, then you know that it's dead and you can remove more of that branch. If it's dying or it's damaged, and especially if they're crisscrossing each other and maybe a couple of branches are rubbing against each other and damaging the surface, wounds like that can create opportunities where infections can come in or pests can get access. So
that's another whole...
Exactly.
That's another whole thing, right? I mean, if you don't prune it properly, that's another whole issue for your tree and weakening the tree.
So if you do it correctly, that reshaping the tree can make them more resistant to wind damage. But if you're not doing it correctly, then it can potentially cause some space for more harm. But palms are kind of their own creature.
I was going to say, what about palms?
Yeah. So palms, you need to wait. You need to do less. Less is more. The more that you do, the more you have to do, because if you are cutting off branches or fronds that still have green to them, they still have nutrient that tree wants to recover before it lets go of that leaf.
Yeah.
Some palms are self-cleaning, where when the leaf is done, it will fall away on its own.
Yes.
And some are not, where you get these massive skirts on like the Washington fan palms and things that they hold on unless you come in and cut them off, but you don't have to. But then every once in a while, they will kind of shed.
So when your landscaper comes to you and says, I need to do a hurricane pruning or hurricane cut.
Well, you don't want the pineapple cut where you've got this little bulb in the middle and then a few little branches sticking up just from the top. You really want to think about holding your arms straight out at your sides, like 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, that you should only cut to that line, that you want to have an entire semicircle of foliage, and anything above that midline of a circle, you need to leave it. So don't over prune your palms, because again, that makes them more susceptible to stress and disease. And that even just the nutrient needs that palms have in particular, that if there's any green left on that leaf, the plant can benefit from it. So it's really better to wait as much as you can.
So people are going to have palms. So a hurricane hits. What are some of the things that, if the hurricane damaged the palm, what's the recovery on a palm? At least 6 months to a year since the palm can regrow anything. So I guess it's patience, really, with palms.
And you might have to give it some support or something, but you make sure that you never nail into the trunk of a palm. And that if you have to get it braced, that I would just say call an arborist, because they know how to brace it correctly. But the trees can kind of brace themselves if you plant in groupings, and some of those groupings might be as far apart as 10 or 15 feet from one tree to the next for something like an oak tree or a large pine. But palms can tend to grow a little closer, just depending on the variety. So putting them into those little groups, that they kind of break up the impact for each other. So safety in numbers, right? That if you're planting appropriately for the species that you're installing, that you really can set your plants up for success, even in severe weather.
Right plant, right place.
Exactly.
That first principle is so important.
Yeah. And knowing what's above your plant, if you're dealing with a tree, knowing what's below it.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with something that's going to have a large root system, that you want to know and call before you dig, and all the things with the 811, and just look around, figure out what your potential hazards are before you select your spot.
So when it comes to, let's say you're on the coast, we have a lot of coastal plants, right, and coastal people. And so now they get saltwater intrusion. That's another whole issue and another whole thing that people have to deal with. So if there is saltwater intrusion, I think what our hurricanes that we had a couple of years ago, it wasn't maybe as severe because we had so much rain right after that. And the rain was able to at least filter out or get rid of a lot of that salt. But let's say we don't. Let's say we have a surge and then there's not as much rain. What can somebody do in order to mitigate that kind of thing? I mean,
well, they do recommend with IFAS that, and there's a whole info sheet about trees after a hurricane and other plants and landscaping after a hurricane. And I'll have that link in the show notes as well. But if you can sort of flush the area with fresh water and let it rinse and dilute some of that salt, then that's going to help your plants recover quicker, including trees, but your other plants as well. And honestly, just if you've got the right plant for the right place, if you're right at the coast, things like mangroves that are made for salt, they can handle it just fine. You don't have to do anything. And yet, I mean, I won't say quite anything, but they're going to be so much lower maintenance because they are just naturally able to thrive in that kind of setting. But if you try to put something that is more sensitive, then
turf grass?
Well, you went there, didn't you?
I did.
So I'm going to move on to the protecting stormwater systems. And that kind of flows in with the turf grass. I got another one in there.
Go ahead.
So
Well, I had to go there because as much as you don't want to see turf grass on coastal communities on the beaches, how often we see so much of it. And I think it's just.
And it's really not the right conditions for it to thrive.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that we
right.
want you to put down synthetic turf either, because that doesn't solve problems as much as it creates them, not even taking into account like microplastics and heat absorption and all of that.
And you think our soil on, in the intercoastal area or away from the coast is sandy. My gosh, really?
Yeah.
It's just not.
So picking things that are more seagrass type plants and the dune plants and the beach plants around here, if you find one of our native friendly nurseries and the plant has dune or beach in the name, that's a good clue that it might be appropriate for a coastal planting area. So just do your research.
And would be more resilient to any saltwater intrusion, certainly. Doesn't mean you won't lose some, but it probably is going to be more resilient.
Yeah. And using that Florida-friendly plant app, the plant selection guide, can really help you narrow it down, because you can put in that you need it to be moderate or high salt tolerance, and then the type of plant that you want. It's going to make it a kind of a short list, but that gives you a recipe, honestly, of.
And there's some that are very pretty.
Yeah,
absolutely. There are some. Dune sunflower is pretty. Yes, it grows all over the place, but it survives there and does very well.
Right.
And it's a pretty fun
And we can
plant.
use that more inland as well.
Correct.
I have a huge patch of it that
I've
taken to running over it with a lawnmower, because it will just keep going and exceed where I want it to be. But
it's resilient to do that.
It's doing great.
Yeah, yeah.
So if the hurricane is on the way, we know some basic stuff that we need to do, but it never hurts to just get a refresh. Some of the obvious things would be securing objects outside, but that could include plants that are in containers, like hanging baskets, things like yard art, patio furniture, we know that. But anything that is just loose, not really anchored to the ground, or not heavy enough to stand on its own. If you've got a folding chair, definitely take it inside. If you've got a concrete bench, it's probably going to make it.
Yeah.
So you know what needs to move and what doesn't. But even that concrete bench, you might want to lay it down on its side, because if it fell over, and especially if something was up under it, it could cause it to break. Yeah. So just being aware, anything that is prone to fall over, if you can just lay it down first, then that'll help it to be more secure, or maybe even just push it closer up against your foundation or up against something like a shed that's more secure and gives it some stability.
Cleaning gutters is a good thing. Going with cleaning gutters, I know we talked about this a little bit, but rain barrels. What if you have rain barrels? What would be the best way to deal with that?
This one kind of surprised me, because it actually recommended making sure that they're full. That if it's too big to move it inside, a pint of water weighs 1 pound. So if you think about a 10-gallon bucket of water, that's how many pounds?
It's a lot of pounds.
A lot of pounds. Each gallon of water that you add, that's a lot of weight that is going to hold that in place.
Okay.
Now, if you've got it connected to a gutter system, like I have some of, I want to make sure that there's a way for the water to flow safely and overflow into an area where it's not going to pool up around my foundation. So having a drainage system in place, or maybe disconnecting if you've got one of those feeder lines that goes from one to the next.
Right.
If you disconnect that so that the water just flows normally through your gutter system, gutter extensions, other things that, it's beyond our scope as far as gardening advice, but just keeping the water away from your foundation.
Yeah.
And again, another episode for another day, but rain gardens. I cannot stress enough how beneficial rain gardens can be in our area.
Really beneficial for in a hurricane situation, definitely. Yeah.
It just helps to create a path where you want the water to go.
Yeah.
And create a space where a hurricane is going to exceed the capacity of your rain garden, but at least it's helping to move it in the right direction and helping that water to be able to percolate back into your soil instead of more of it running off and taking contaminants into natural water bodies. So again, if your rain barrel is able to move easily, go ahead and take it inside. But if it's difficult to move it, let the water hold it down and just let it be mostly full. And let's say that we have a loss of utility functions for a couple of days after the hurricane. You can use that rainwater from your rain barrels for things like flushing toilets or, rinsing your shoes off, or things that you wouldn't consume that water, but even if you did have salt water get in.
Think about any of that, but
Well, sure.
no, that makes perfect sense.
I mean, some people will scoop out their pool water to use for things that it's not going to be harmful to the thing, but it's just an available source of water that you're conserving the fresh water.
Let's get back into gardening.
Yeah, we're kind of all about hurricanes here, but
I know. No, but I think it's important.
But yeah, just understanding, and again, once the hurricane is over and it's passed, that there's some gardening tasks that you're going to have to do as far as cleanup. Anything that has fallen down, go ahead and pick that up, clean it up, figure out with your local municipalities.
Canopy cleaning. So you may have to take out some hanging limbs that may be
the
out.
damaged things that need to be maintained, and make sure that your utilities are the priority, that if there's a power line issue or something, that you don't want to harm yourself, but you also want to make sure that you've done your part, that if there's something on your property that you can clear out around something, as long as you're safe to do that. So identify the hazards, clear up debris, branches, and some of your plants, like smaller trees, might need some stakes or supports if they got impacted by wind.
And then what you should think about is just trying to have a routine tree management and improve some resilience. That way you'll have a speedier post-recovery. So that's really important.
Yeah. And if you did have a tree that was damaged and it has to be removed, maybe you can leave part of it as a snag, even if it's fallen over, and you can just cut.
We talked about deadwood and how important that is too. So maybe you can have a little deadwood garden somewhere too.
And if not, then do some extra research this time before you replace that tree and figure out, what could I do better this time? So I think gardening is all about trial and error, and errors point out our flaws.
We've talked about that a number of times. Yeah. I mean, how many plants have I killed?
Well, and you just keep planting so nobody notices.
Yeah. And a hurricane can exacerbate that. But again, if you maybe think about that beforehand, and we go back to the right plant, right place.
Right. And it really shows you the limits of your garden, that when you have an extreme event like that, or even the extreme drought that we've been under, we can see where the limitations are, that maybe we can rein in some of our creativity in a way that, we're trying to have a certain plant that is just not the best for this place, but we're making it work until we just can't. And with the watering restrictions and the fertilizer bans and all the other things.
And our hardiness zone going from when I moved here was 9A. I think we're up to 10
A and B.
So having the hardiness zones where there were plants that when I first moved here many, many years ago, I could have and beautiful. And now it's just more difficult. Right. And I don't know if it's just because of the extremes with the drought that's happening now and the extra hurricanes that we had I think the weather has become more extreme.
Yeah. And just anything that maybe was pushing the limits before, just kind of rein it back in. So enough about hurricanes.
Yes, enough about that.
Back to tropics, though, because I had a little bit of fun with just the word itself, because there's another layer of the word tropic or tropical that takes the vein of tropism. And it really is a related, connected word, but it's an interesting thing when it comes to plants and their ability to adapt to their circumstance and adapt to their environment. And
that's what fascinates me the most about plants. I mean, plants are sessile. They can't move. This is why, and again, not to get too geeky, but as a geeky botany person, why I love plants more than I mean, wildlife is cool and it moves around and everything. But when I was in college and I was focusing on botany, people were like looking at me like, what? No, but because the plant can't move, but yet it has to adapt to its environment the way that wildlife does.
Right.
So one example I gave before we were talking today, if it's very warm, wildlife can go find some shade. So bird can go into some shade. Plants can't do that.
Right.
They have to adapt to that particular environment. And so when we talk about tropics and subtropics, the tropism is really how they've adapted. And it's just so fascinating.
And if it gets really dry, an animal can go and find a different water source or dig a little deeper for one.
Good point.
A plant has to do the same thing. It has to be able to find enough water to survive, or it just can't survive. And it doesn't have much option of where it can go. So again, with picking the right plant for the right place, If you're putting something into your garden, you want it to be able to tolerate the dry spells that we do get. And so something that puts down those deeper roots is really going to help with the water table being accessible to that plant. So that would be what we call hydrotropism. So the plant's ability to detect and grow towards the water. And I think I mentioned a couple episodes ago about Mesoamerican technique for gardening called oyas, where you put a semi-permeable vessel like a terracotta pot underground next to your plant, and the plant roots will grow up to that vessel, and you keep the vessel full of water. It doesn't evaporate, but the plant roots will kind of extract that water out through the terracotta. So hydrotropism in the plant is that ability generally of the root to dig in and find the water where it needs to. And that's an argument for not overwatering your plants because you want to let them have to search a little harder.
We talked about that in a number of episodes.
And letting them get to the point of some stress.
Stressing them out a little bit.
A little bit. Have to be able to fend for themselves at some point. So thermotropism is another interesting one where plants like a rhododendron up north where they get frost will curl up their leaves if it gets excessively cold. But we see that more on the side of the heat where the plant will wilt a little bit in response to that heat, that it's drawing the resources back from the leaves. So it's kind of letting the leaf suffer more. And if the plant itself recovers, then it will re-nourish that leaf and it will tend to bounce back, or it might drop that leaf and put out a new one.
There's another thing that fascinates me with plants because of the regeneration that they can do.
And it kind of ties back to the thought of tropism can actually be positive or negative.
Correct.
So some of the plants that maybe grow in a wetland area, let's think about a cypress tree, has developed the ability to put up these cypress knees. And we don't fully understand what they do, but
part of it is exchanging the gases.
Right. There's a lot that it can.
Because if it was just completely submerged, they wouldn't be able to exchange the gases as well as they would.
Right. So in a sense, that's a negative tropism where it's getting away from too much water.
Good point.
Compared to a root going deeper to find more water. So you have both sides of that in these different tropisms.
One of them that really fascinates me is and I'm going to say this wrong, thingmotropism. I said that wrong.
Thingmotropism.
Thingmotropism.
So I told
that one is really fascinating.
I tell my science students that it's a thingamajig.
A thingamajig.
Because
I like that.
It can react to touch in a way that we think of like the little mimosa sensitive plants that if you touch the leaves that they'll curl up, or even some of the carnivorous plants, if they feel movement on their sensing structures, that they'll grab onto that insect that has triggered them. But another example of that would be like a cucumber or anything in the cucurbit family or other vining plants that they will grab onto a source of structure.
Virginia creeper.
And whether they grab in like a claw or whether they wrap around as a tendril, that's examples of the thingmotropism where it's reacting to touch in its environment.
And the reason that they would do that is if you think about, let's say, like a Virginia creeper, for example, which is more of an underground species, but they need light, so they grow up. And then, of course, there is a downside to this, too, because some species, even though I don't think it's a parasitic kind of relationship, but because they grow up like wild grapes here, for example, our grapes. They grow so much around the plants that now the plants that they have been wrapped around can't get the light to photosynthesize and start to die. It's not really a parasitic relationship like...
Well, if the plant is invasive, that could be an example of how it's causing harm.
No, that's a good point.
That if it's climbing up and crowding out a good plant, a native plant.
Like our wonderful air potato, right? Yeah, that's very invasive, and what it does is it climbs up. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and it just takes away from the other things. But what goes up must come down, right? Yep. So another one of the tropisms is a plant's reaction to gravity, which is sometimes called geotropism or even gravitropism.
Yep.
And let's say that a hurricane knocked over one of your plants and you were gone for the season and nobody picked it up for you. That plant is actually going to start to turn itself upright to its new orientation.
And the roots also would turn itself down. to try to find water.
And that would be more if it's in the ground versus in a container, but it's still going to tend in that direction. Depending on how long you leave it, it would be more so on the root side, but it's going to happen quicker and more visibly in especially a young plant that maybe gets knocked on its side in a container, that you'll start to see it kind of bend over.
I think people have all seen this and, they go, what is this? Why is this going like this? Yeah.
And it kind of is a borderline between, is it really the gravitropism or is it phototropism? Because that's the other one on the list where anybody that has started plants from seeds knows that if you set it in a window, or even just a plant that you buy, if it's in a window, it's going to tend to face the window. Well, you want to be able to see it, so you roll it around the other way, and now it starts to face
the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're constantly playing a merry-go-round with your plant here. But these are the plant's response to its environment, and we call those tropism, and it's based on the same root word as the tropics. So Alan asked me, is like, now how does this connect to what we're talking about? It's like, well, it doesn't, but it's fun.
It doesn't, but it does. Because again, plants, as I said, they're sessile. They don't move, and they need a way to figure out how to interact with their environment the way that wildlife does. And this is how they do it. And I think it goes along with the tropics. It goes along with what plants you should plant and what the right plant in the right place and all of that. I think it all fits in very, very well.
And being able to adapt to the conditions and the environment that the plant is in, that you want to put it in an environment that it's going to tend to adapt well, but the plants are so resilient. And that's one of the fun things about gardening, is seeing how plants really can overcome the odds. And you want to set them up with good odds, but things happen beyond our control, because you ultimately can't control nature.
But most plants are so resilient, and that's what really fascinates me about them.
So talking about tropical, part of our getting ready in our Ready, Set, Grow closing segment is tropical fruit trees are going to need some maintenance this time of year. So watching for diseases, watching for any kind of particular pests and things that might be more prevalent in the warm months, and just really staying on top of it. And the same thing if you do have turf grass or other plants, that if you see a problem, address it where it is. If you have one pest on one plant, you don't need to put a pesticide on your whole yard. You just need to take some integrated pest management approach on that one plant, figure out what is the least intrusive thing that you can do, and then take it up a level if that doesn't work. So
one of my suggestions for lawns this time of year, I know we're getting a little bit more rain, but we're still pretty much in a drought. And I have areas that are now getting a little crispy and brown, and I'm replanting those with some ground covers.
Yeah, I've been using this as a good time to just let more grass die, and that while it's dry and stressed, that I can remove sections of it a little easier. And now that we're starting to get some more rain, it's coming back. But again, don't overreact and don't overwater, because we are still in a drought and we are still under water restrictions. Those have been extended.
I was going to say they were extended till October 1st.
October 1st. So the fertilizer ban and the watering restrictions end at the same time. So they go through the end of September until October 1st. You can resume those things. So unless it has to be extended for additional drought, but we're optimistic. The two of us, at least, will get enough rain to...
Somewhat optimistic.
Somewhat, yeah. And we'd already talked about pruning trees, palms, other things as needed. But I would say something that is really relevant to this time of year is making sure that you yourself are ready for gardening. If you're getting out into the elements, wear a hat, wear sunscreen, wear a lightweight, longer sleeve to protect your skin. And stay hydrated, because it is very hot out there. It's very humid. It tends to kind of make you sweat more, which draws the hydration out of your body. So just make sure that you're being smart when you're out in the garden, that you're protecting yourself.
Yeah, think about maybe doing it earlier in the day if you can. before the sun comes up and it's too hot. But yes, think about that. But hydration is really important.
Yeah. And still with setting yourself up for success, that you can use that extreme climate for solarization, where you can blanket out and trap in the heat on plants that you don't want, whether it is a patch that has a lot of weeds or whether it's some grass that you want to reduce from your lawn. That if you use the heat of the summer, it really takes at least 4 to 6 weeks to solarize and kill whatever's underneath it. And there's some great resources on that on the IFAS Gardening Solutions. I can share a link with that in the show notes as well. But using this weather to your advantage, because there's not as much that we want to be planting right now.
No.
So as far as what we're going to grow, I like to use the guides that are put out by the Gardening Solutions.
Yeah, you mentioned these info guides, which are really good.
So we have a collection of what herbs to plant at different times of year. And we have spring, and we have winter, and we have fall. We don't have one for the summer because this is not the time to be planting herbs.
Not here.
So not here. It's just too hot, and you're gonna create an impossible situation. Now, if you have containers and you're able to protect them from the elements, then you can do things outside of the scope of what is recommended for our climate zone because you're creating your own microclimate. But if you're talking about putting it outside, just wait. It's not time yet. We'll get back into our gardening seasons, but for right now, there's really very few things that we want to be planting. But some flowers are exceptions to that. We have things like the tropical sage and even some of the zinnias and celosia, begonias. Here you can plant them pretty much any time of year. There's several different kinds of plants that if you look at the flower planting guide on the Gardening Solutions, you can see a list of things that you can grow in full or part sun.
I want to know if that guide does North, Central, and South Florida?
It does.
So,
and
we really need to think about where we are, which is Central, but...
Yeah, it splits it in straight lines, but the climate is not a straight line thing. So we really want to think about Pinellas and some parts of Polk County, but mostly anything that is a zone 10 and above, just treat it as South Florida. So Pinellas is zone 10. It just needs to follow those guidelines to be better at your success rate and your gardening happiness. But there are still a couple of things that we can plant. And I picked a particular one, which is a edible plant that is a flowering plant that is also a foliage plant. It's kind of a little bit of everything, and it is called a roselle or a hibiscus sabdarifa. Correct me if you know Latin, but it's a tropical plant in the hibiscus family. It has edible red calyxes that are often used in tea or jam or sauce, and the leaves can actually be eaten. They're kind of like a spinach effect. That you can eat them. They will sometimes be green, but some of them actually have a reddish color to them as well, at least at certain times of year. And it's just a fascinating plant. It can thrive up in zones 8 through 11. So it will actually act as an annual plant in climates that are further north, like 3 through 6.
You said it's a variety of a hibiscus.
Yeah, so it is a shrub. It can grow in colder climates, but it will tend to either die or die back. And in our climate, it will just continue to grow year round because it's warm enough for it. And some people actually call it the Florida cranberry because I've seen a relish made with the calyx part of it that it is almost like a dried cranberry kind of effect, and it grows here where cranberries won't. And another one is Jamaican sorrel because they're using it for the leaf having that more herby effect. So it's just a fascinating plant, and around here it does produce flowers that are like you would expect from a hibiscus, typically that kind of red fuchsia color. And it can grow 4 to 8 feet tall. And some people even use the stems as a source of plant fiber.
I would assume that it's not in big box stores, though, probably.
You'll have better luck at more of a local nursery kind of place. And any place that is going to be more Florida friendly. I actually found one at the Green Thumb Festival. And it was from one of our local plant shops that was participating in the festival. So You can find it around here, and it actually propagates pretty easily. So it is a nice pass-along plant that if you know somebody that has one, they can save you some seeds or they can give you some cuttings. But you had an interesting one.
I do. And it's considered a native species, really more towards South Florida, but it's the gumbo limbo tree. First, I love the name.
Right.
I don't know what their Latin name is, but I just love the name. And it's a big tree, but they can grow very well in our area now. I think in the past, again, back when I first moved here some 40 years ago, it was marginal in terms of where it could be. But now it's zones 10B to 11. It's known as the tourist tree for a lot of reasons. It's red bark. This was one of the interesting facts that I found because of its red bark. So why is it the tourist tree? Well, because tourists sometimes forget to put on sunscreen.
That's hilarious.
And get sunburn. And so that was an interesting fact that I learned about that.
And don't forget it's red peeling bark.
Red peeling bark. That's correct. That's correct. But it is a tree. So it can get large. It can get up to 50 feet in height. But it is highly drought tolerant. It is highly salt tolerant. It is very good for poor soils in urban conditions. I was watching a video of this, I think it was a park in Fort Myers, where they planted a whole row of gumbo limbo trees. So it's a really good tree to plant these days in our area. I know there's one in the botanical garden. And I think because it is salt tolerant, has poor soils, it works great in urban conditions, usually free of serious pests. It's a tree that can really thrive here. And I think that's a really important thing.
It's also wind resistant.
And it's also wind resistant.
Even though it's fast growing.
Correct. Yeah.
That it can grow up to 60 feet tall.
Yeah.
Something that I found really fascinating is that because the wood itself is very lightweight, that it was used to make carousel horses and model airplanes, even matchsticks.
Very cool.
So I just thought that was such a cool tree.
It is a cool tree. And I just love the name.
Yep. Well, either name, the tourist tree or the
tourist tree
gumbo limbo.
Gumbo limbo. But it's a great one. I know you can get them, again, it's probably not going to be in the big box stores, more the local nurseries, but you can find them in various sizes.
Yeah. So lots of fun stuff in this episode. I would love to get some comments on this one and feedback about this little bit of a mishmash and playing around with the word of tropical and everything that means to us. Leave us some comments. We are on Spotify. That might be where you're listening to us. We're actually on YouTube Music now. Thank you
YouTube Music.
to Alan.
We're on YouTube Music now, which I didn't know that they had podcasts as part of YouTube Music. And so we were able to get ourselves on that.
Yeah.
So please listen and give us comments.
Absolutely. And we do monitor for those comments. We're on Apple Music, iHeartRadio, all kind of different platforms. Radio St. Pete rebroadcasts our episodes frequently, and we love to hear from you. So drop us a line. There is also a feedback survey in the comments that goes to the University of Florida. And then anything else that you can give us, what you want to hear about, how this has been helpful to you.
Yeah.
And just keep growing, keep gardening, stay cool, and stay hydrated. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Planting Pinellas. We hope you're feeling inspired to get involved, learn more, and grow alongside this incredible community.
Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you like the show, leave us 5 stars or a review. And don't forget to share with fellow plant lovers. Until next time, keep planting, keep growing, and keep making Pinellas County a place to thrive.
This podcast is brought to you by the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension in Pinellas County, Florida, an equal opportunity institution.